Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia.
And I'm Katie.
Hi.
Hi.
So we have a to be continued from last week.
Oh, yes. We stopped at like the cliffhanger, man.
Yeah. I think we could have talked about that for a long time. Last episode was bonding with baby, and then that kind of spun into, what happens if you have kiddo number 2 or 3 or 4, or, however many you choose to bring into your
Mhm,
family.
mhm.
Um, And so that kind of got us on this topic of, you know, whether you've got, biological children, adopted children, stepchildren, like there's all kinds of foster children,
Mm.
how do you bring in more people and still maintain that bond?
Oh,
Yeah. So you and I have different situations because I had my first and then 2 years later had my second,
mhm.
but you had an older kiddo around when you and Rob had Ellie.
Yes. However, he was my stepson, which we can talk about, right? And there are many, many flavors of step families. And um, a lot of it's dictated by philosophy and tradition and personality, right? How those step families unfold. And I don't know if, because of the culmination of all of those aspects in my family, I have much personal experience as far as like being able to maintain a bond, right? Like with my first child when introducing the second, because I don't know if we had a very close bond. If that, I mean, I feel sad saying that because I think that's something that I always wanted and maybe one of the biggest griefs of my life that I didn't get.
Mm,
But, um, you know, I was aware really early on that even though his parents were divorced, they still were good parents to him. And I wasn't needed.
yeah.
I did my best to show up in my best capacity and to bring positives to his life, but he didn't need me as a parent. He had a really great dad who was in the home and very active, and he had a really great mom who lived like a mile and a half away from us. And
Yeah.
so um, I was truly more of like, I cooked some dinners and I helped keep the house clean and um, helped buy back to school clothes. But like, as far as like keeping a bond that was special between he and I when we introduced our baby into the mix, that really wasn't something, a task that I had to navigate personally. So I think you can probably speak much, much more like experientially and also just like from a professional standpoint because of the population
Mm,
you work with versus me on this
yeah.
than I can.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you're right. There's so many dynamics in step families that can differ for all kinds of reasons, right? That you're not going to come up with like a one size fits all scenario for that. Um, but it is interesting to think like, okay, yes, the bond is not going to be the same as it would have been with like two of your birth children, right? Or if you've adopted two children from birth, or kind of a different scenario. Like he was already older,
Mm.
but maybe the maybe the conversation becomes, how do we support that older child when new family members come in? And I think, right, how a child responds to one of their parents having children with another person really depends a little bit on that temperament of that kid,
Yeah.
and then their own internal narrative, which we may never be privy to,
Mm.
right? And what that means. I work with kids that have all kinds of blended families, and their parents have remarried and have another, and it's going well. Like they're
Mm.
really excited by it. But I don't know if they have two involved parents or one's less involved now, right? So somebody else kind of filled in the gap, and um, they don't necessarily feel displaced, but I could see where that could come up for somebody, whether or not that's true. But I could come up for your, I mean, your birth children too, right? Like you've got one kiddo, you have another one. Not all children are super excited for the birth of a sibling.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you actually, because you and your sister are
Mhm.
several, there's a big age gap between the two of you.
Yes, we're seven. My biological sister and I are set. Well, so I have a pretty diverse family experience too. My biological parents were divorced when I was an infant and then each remarried. So I grew up living with my biological mother and my stepfather, who I got at as a baby. And then he said his vows to me at the altar when he married my mother when I was 3. Um, my biological father remarried when I was 9. They were not married for a very long time, but Sue, my stepmom, is my closest parent figure to this day at 43 years of age. She has a biological child who's my stepsister. And then my biological mother and stepfather had a child between the two of them, who's my half sister, Sarah. So Danielle, my stepsister, is 3 years younger than me, but she grew up in New Jersey. And then my half sister, Sarah, who's 7 years younger than me, grew up in the same house I grew up in, but 7 years later with a different biological father.
Yeah.
So a lot of diversity there.
Yeah. I mean, and so you can even speak to like, right, your own experience of like, being 7 years old and having a new baby come in.
hmm I don't remember it really. Honestly, I really don't think I had any memory of it. I think the
Yeah.
only thing I remember, I don't have like a we didn't play together, obviously, right? Like she was 11 when I moved out to like launch to go to college.
Yeah.
And I do remember I have negative memories, but I don't that wasn't her fault and it wasn't my fault. That was our parents' fault. Things that my our parents split us. They pitted us against each other. They gave us each superlatives and assumed that the other could not also have that superlative.
Yeah.
So like I was the smart one, I was the pretty one, she was the happy one, she was the athletic one, right? And so we were typecasted,
Mm,
and even to this day, some of those dynamics still bubble up from time to time, right?
yeah.
There feels like sometimes I feel like there's like a defensiveness around, well, I can have those traits too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know, man. I appreciate and love my sister now as an adult. Same with my stepsister. Like it's interesting to me how similar she and I are, even though we like grew up in completely different households, completely different parts of the country. Were raised by different parents,
Yeah.
but have zero genetic matter in common. But she and I are so similar in so many ways. We're different in a lot of ways too, but we have a lot of philosophical similarities and similarities in the way we parent and so forth and so on, personality,
Yeah.
some traits that are similar. And I appreciate having her in my life too. But I didn't have like the experience you like Kinsey and Ansley have, where they have a sibling, in the home that is same mom and same dad, that's so close in age, for your friends or your enemies, depending on the moment, right?
Depending on the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and gender, I think, plays a role. I often wonder, I have two girls. I often wonder if there's just inherently more competition than if they were opposite genders, or
Mm.
different genders. I don't know that to be true or not. But it is interesting. So, I mean, I remember, being pregnant with my second and very mindful about how I was going to introduce this new little nugget. So, and Ansley was only 2, so she wasn't like, I don't think she had a clue. But I think there are certain things you can do, right? Like obviously age appropriately, including your current child or children if there's more in the process. So like, we talked about it. She got to like touch my belly. She got to put input on baby names, but no, we did not take her suggestions. She was like 2. I mean, we think I had a little doll and she would carry the doll around, and that was her baby. So I got her a baby. So she had a baby when I had a baby, and this doll had a baby carrier, and it had all the things I had. So if I was changing Kenzie's diaper, she was changing. If I was nursing, she was laying next to me with her little doll, and the dolly was also nursing. And like we just kind of did that. Like I included her as much as I could.
Uh,
Um,
so cute.
so she didn't feel displaced,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
Um,
I love hearing the stories, and I've seen this before, like where like the older sister will get like a little t-shirt to wear, like I'm the big sis, or also gets presents like when at the baby shower, or like when the baby's born, the older kid also gets gifts.
yeah.
Um, but there's some psychological underpinning to that, right, Claudia? Like this idea that just because there's another child doesn't mean that I'm getting forgotten or that I don't have an important role.
Right. Yeah, like you still have a role, but your role is shifting a little bit. I think it's normal, even if there's not a conscious understanding of it, to feel a little displaced. Wait, this little thing comes in and takes my attention,
Yeah.
right? Mommy has to feed the baby, mommy has to nurse. And when they're little, this is like constant, right? She's
Mhm.
always eating, which again, going back to that carrier thing from last episode, game changer because I had two littles and Kenzie could just sit there and nurse endlessly and I had free hands to like navigate the world with, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, there's this idea of feeling displaced. And I think there's things kind of that we can do subtly and we don't always know we're doing
Mhm.
that you kind of hit on with your sister, right?
Mhm.
Oh, she's the quiet one. She's the
Oh,
extroverted one. She's the one that does this. She's the one that. And now, yes, your kids are going to be different. They're going to have differences. And you can highlight those differences a little bit. They come up a lot in our house when I've got like one kid who's like extroverting and loud, and my introverted kid is like raging for her to be quiet because she just wants 5 minutes of silence. Right. So we do honor those differences in my house of like your sister needs quiet, your others, your sister needs to be loud and get some energy out. And we do highlight those just as a general understanding that people operate differently and how do we make this work in our house. Um, but not in a way that fosters competition.
yeah.
Like more in a, yeah, you know what? It's okay to be really different. They notice each other's differences,
Right.
right? But they were talking about something the other day and they was like, yeah, because she really likes sports and I don't. I'm like, but that's okay. You don't have to like sports. You like other things that she doesn't like. And you get to choose what you want to, be interested in. And you don't have to like the things she likes.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
do highlight that, but I think it's like not throwing out that label that's gonna stick forever, you
Right.
know?
Yes.
And it's hard because as a parent, I see it. I see the, like, very stark differences in my kid,
Uh-huh.
in both of them, right? In the one who's a little more of a, challenger of the rules and one who's a little bit more,
Mhm.
um, measured and safety aware, right?
Mhm.
But that's now, that doesn't mean that's what they're gonna grow into, right?
Yeah.
Um So it is hard to not compare and contrast because I think you're trying to figure out like how to parent this new version coming in and what worked with, your first kid or your first two kids or your first three kids may not work with this new arrival, right?
Mhm.
Um but I think it's important to have those conversations with your partner maybe on like how do we parent all these people differently or do you notice these differences and not necessarily with the kids?
Yeah. I think that's so important. Yeah. And I think that it's you have to maybe watch your mouth a little more when you have multiples, right? Then,
Mhm.
I'm thinking about like Ellie's in this phase right now where she I guess every phase is a phase of development, but I've just seen this summer. I feel like every summer when we get kind of alone time, right? Or family time, and we're away from the chatter and the noise of the social milieu of school. She kind of seems to kind of fast track in her personal identity. And yeah, she did it last summer and she's doing it again this summer. And it's funny because we can say things like, oh, you're so much like me in this way, right? Or you're so much like your dad in this way, but there's no it's kind of implied that, right, because she's an only child, right, in our family right now, right, our oldest has launched, and did several years ago. Long has been launched for a while, so it's just the three of us in the home now. That, like, obviously, like, I think her dad hung the moon because I love him. He's my husband, and obviously, like, I like who I am, because it's me. And so whenever I say, "Oh, you're like your dad in this way," that's a good thing. Oh, you're like me in this way, that's a good thing, right?
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
you have to be careful with that, even because if there could be multiple children, it's like, well, who's like who, and is that a good thing, right? Or
Mm.
you're just like grandma. Ooh, is that a good thing? Oh, you're just like your uncle so and so. Is that a good thing, right? And some of
Yeah.
those, again, that comparison, whether it's with each other or whether it's with someone else, right? And
Mm.
we're
Yeah.
contrasting.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like the tone and intention because I'm a little conflicted on that, right?
Hmm.
I think there's something lovely about kids seeing themselves in their parents. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
like my mom like this. I'm like my dad like this. Like I belong here. And now
Yes.
I think this is true even for non-biological children because there may still have traits that they share with each caregiver, right? There's
Absolutely.
there's something nice about that, like I, this trait resonates in this family, right? Like I'm connected to this family because I share these things. And I think that's sweet. I think where it becomes problematic is when it's an all or nothing thing. Only one person can share this trait and nobody else can have it. That's problematic.
Yeah.
Or if it's spun to the negative,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Like you're just
That's
like
right.
your dad and you're stubborn. Um, then I think that doesn't feel so good.
Right. Or if it's something that the child either doesn't want, but they're assigned it anyway, right? And that doesn't
Mhm.
resonate. That can be an acute sense of pain. I remember feeling that as a little girl.
Yeah.
As assigned negative traits, it didn't resonate with me, right? Looking back, or now I know that was projection, right?
Mhm.
Displacement. But as a little girl, how confusing is that, right? If you look inside yourself and you say, "Well, I feel like I'm this," and then somebody else is saying, "But you're this," right?
Mm.
That's really, really a mind fuck. Excuse my language, right?
Yeah.
Or if you do feel like you're something and somebody else says, "No, you're not that thing," right? Uh,
Mhm.
I remember a story that my mother was so proud of this. She told this story over and over again about the summer that I went to dance camp. And she sat beside my dad in the audience and watched me dance up on stage and said to my dad at the end of the performance, "Well, it's good. It's a good thing she's good at art."
Yikes.
And she was
Why'd
so
she tell you? Why do you know that story?
She thought that was hilarious. She told that story so many times. So every time because I didn't hear her say that, right? It never would have hurt me. But I heard the retell over and over and over again. So every time I heard that, I internalized, I'm not a good dancer. I'm not a good dancer. I'm not a good dancer.
Mm.
Well, fast forward to when I'm 36 years old and I got certified in probably like one of the hardest forms of yoga you can teach, and half of it is African tribal dance. And this white girl could do that shit like a freaking boss, man. And I
Yeah.
was so
Like
proud
I
of
can
myself.
dance.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was the oldest person in that class, and I rocked it out. I was so proud of myself. Partly because I was freaking old and I could do it and it was hard, but also because I completely restored that for myself. That
Mm.
was like my 36-year-old temper tantrum saying, "No, I'm not. I
Yeah.
can dance too, mommy."
Yeah. And you can see where stuff like that, right? That statement can
Yeah.
cause a lot of potential competitiveness between the siblings in the house,
Yeah.
right? Like if you almost had that response that you had at 36 as a child,
Right.
it impacts the relationship you have with your siblings just because like you're trying to disprove it, you know? Yeah. And especially if, your sister was labeled the dancer.
Which she was. She actually went to high school for performing arts and was a dancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. You could look at my sister and I as a case study in bouncing off one another's adjectives that we were assigned,
Mm,
right? And I think she probably had a harder time with it because I was on the planet for 7 years without her. And I left the house earlier is the wrong word, but like I left the house with only 7 years of being, no, that's not right. She was 7, 11, 4 years. No, that's not right. How many years are we together? She was born when I was 7. I left at, let's say, 17, 10 years. I was in the house with her for 10 years. Then I was out, right? I formed my own identity. I was like, let me get out of here and figure out who I really am outside of these confines that were placed on me, right?
hmm.
Um, whereas she has always had me as her sibling. Does that make sense?
Yes.
As the younger.
Yeah.
And whether she liked it or not, right? I'm sure there was always this kind of shadow, as there is for younger siblings.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how much we as parents can influence those sibling relationships, and our kids. Like, do you ever wonder what would you would you each have taken different paths if you didn't have those adjectives assigned to you?
Right.
Like, you know?
Absolutely. Probably. I mean, my God. Yeah. Right. We could psychoanalyze all that for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on maybe this topic is switching gears midway through. Maybe it's more on, fostering sibling relationships when you've got growing families.
Hmm.
Again, whether it's a stepchild or not, right? So I mean, you had a stepson, but like how did you, again, with a big age difference, how do you foster, when Ellie was born and his connection, at least to her, maybe not to you, not maintaining the bond for you,
Right.
but opening that up for how do you kind of integrate them as siblings,
Yeah.
and
Right. And that's interesting, right? Because I mean, if you think about a 14-year-old boy,
things he's not interested in, babies.
okay, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so what are the realistic expectations there? I think he was happy.
Yes.
I think he thought she was cute and cool, and I think he loved her and he held her, and I mean, he did everything right and nothing wrong. And I think that what do? You just watch your kids and you see how are they, and like, do I need to do anything different? Do I need to adjust my approach based on how they're receiving each other? I think but so I think overall we did pretty good with that. They still have a
Mhm.
fairly positive relationship as much as you can, I think, when two siblings are so far apart in age and live in different states. And but they text.
That's cute. Actually have a picture of him at my house with Rob. And I don't know where we had gone, but they had the kids. Like they had my two girls and Ellie, and it was Ross and Ethan,
Oh
and
my,
they're like on my couch with like all the girls, like babysitting these littles.
oh my
It is the
gosh.
cutest picture. And I mean, Ethan was a gamer because he tolerated this day that I'm sure he had things he would have rather been doing than hanging out with, a house full of, I don't know, four and unders. Like they were not old, they weren't like they were little.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, because it's a fine line for him too, right? Because you want to include him, but you don't want to dump the weight of the responsibility of having a little sister onto him. And I
Right,
know that he had another sibling. He was like,
right.
this kid got like all the babies.
Yep. Eva was born maybe a year and a half before Ellie. So
Okay.
Ellie and Eva are pretty close in age. Eva did come along first. So
Yeah.
Ethan did experience that in his mom's household before he did in ours.
Hmm.
And I mean, he's got a positive bond with both of them. I think that
Yeah.
he um, likes both of them. I think he took his responsibility for being the big brother seriously. I don't think he ever had to like really like babysit,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
either of them. That I'm maybe maybe Eva, because when he was, let's imagine if he's 17, right? Ellie would have been 3. Eva could have been 4. That could have been like, okay, well, 4-year-old can stay with a
Yeah.
17-year-old. We had moved to a different state by that time. So maybe he did some babysitting at his mom's house, but he never really was in that position because of when Ellie was too little, right, for somebody at his age to be the babysitter.
Yeah, yeah. Which,
You know,
I think is okay because I think sometimes,
yeah.
and again, this is a temperament thing, right? Like it's possible that if he was, you know, like I see it in some of my clients, like super stereotypical because I think males can be nurturers too, but they like that like, little girl that like just gravitates towards mommyhood like her whole life, I see it in those clients and they almost like take on that role happily to be like mommy number two. And I know in our house, like that doesn't always work well for us. Like my kids love to parent each other. And I always have to tell them like, we got this. Like, I got it. I don't need reinforcements. I got your dad and we're good. Like, we don't need a team of 10 doing this. Right. But you do see some of those kiddos that kind of naturally gravitate towards that and maybe take on more of that role, right? That role of being more caregivery. Um, I don't know if it's like biological wiring or what, but I think it's always important not to
Kind of
dump
mine
like,
too, right?
yeah, yeah, but not
Because
to dump so much responsibility. But that's easy. I don't know. When you have like 7 kids, maybe you can't do that, right? At that point, it's like a division of labor to make sure everyone's needs are met.
yeah, well, and I've heard adults grieve that, right? That I never
Mm,
be a kid. I had to be. My mother always expected me to. I always had to be the babysitter. I was always taking care of my siblings. My parents went to these parties and I was left home to care for them. I cooked for them. I made sure they were safe. I put them in the bed at night, right? Nobody did that for me, right? I had to
mm,
be a child. I had to be a little adult, right? And
yes.
that's one end of that coin. And then you've got the other, which is like you said, if somebody shows this natural nurturing aptitude, like you want to hold the baby, okay, hold the baby, right? Like, oh, you're really good at soothing the baby. That's amazing. Like, how do you support that? But also, right? And again, I guess, and at the end of the day, everything just comes back to you do your best, and then you watch your kids,
Mm,
and you watch to see, does this feel like a good thing, or does this feel like it could be, edging into unhealthy territory?
yeah. And it's constant reevaluation. You know,
Absolutely.
we just had a conversation in our house the other day because my kids have been bickering endlessly. And I was like, you guys, like, this is not how we're going to do things in this house. Like, you guys are very different. You're going to drive each other a little nuts every now and then, and that's okay. You're going to disagree.
Mhm.
But the agitation that's going on here and the level to which we're taking it is just not gonna fly. And I
Mhm.
actually had a private conversation with both of them, to which each said, why don't you talk to her? And I'm like, I am. This is your version. There's another version waiting. Like, we're gonna talk about your role and your play, and then we're gonna, um, and what had come out. Well, so my oldest shuts down and says nothing and just blank stares at me. And I was like, I don't even know if she heard any of it. She did. She wrote her sister a long letter, and so I read the letter. So I know the conversation went somewhere. But youngest had said to me, I think what she's struggling with is her sister's getting older and outgrowing some of that developmental leap that we're at feels
Mhm.
big right now, even though they're still only 2 years apart.
Yeah. Mhm.
2 years between 2 and 4 years old versus 2 years at 10 and 12 or 14 and 16. Like, there's certain times where that feels bigger,
Right.
and she's into things that I'm not into yet. So, like, she's just doing other stuff and I feel left behind
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
still want to play this way or do this. And she's
Yeah.
like not interested in that thing. Right. So, um, the conversation that we had was, okay, so what can you guys do to connect? And it doesn't have to be constant, but there's something you guys enjoy doing together.
Yeah.
right? Um, how do we get back to doing that? Because I think what they were reacting to was missing each other and being a little bit angry with one another.
Yeah.
And then that would come out over or like everything, right? But
Yeah.
I had to slow it down and be like, what is like, there's not a minute that goes by that you're not like yelling at each other. What is happening? This is not acceptable. Um, so there is, and it's funny because I was telling a friend of mine about this. She's like, did your parents ever do that with you? Like when you and your sister were fighting, like sit you guys down and be like, what's the problem? You know?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, there was like a knock it off kind of vibe, right? But like nobody said, why are you guys fighting so much? Why aren't you getting
Right.
along? Why are you so mean to each other right now? They just like let us be mean sometimes. Cause I think they were like, ah, kids, they'll work it out, you know?
Now, tell me again how far apart you and your sister are.
Yeah, we're about 4 years apart. But the way our birthdays are, like I'm at the beginning of the year, she's at the end. So it's almost like it was 5 school grades. So
That's a pretty significant distance.
yeah, like I was in 7th grade and she went to college.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a big difference. I mean, it feels big, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like we were never in the same place developmentally,
Uh-huh.
like just ever. Um, but I think, I don't think my parents just kind of like they'll figure it out. Like,
Right.
I think we do a lot to like sibling dynamics, you know? Um,
Hmm.
and I do think there's some level of natural competitiveness in siblings.
Hmm.
I do think same genders, maybe that shows up a little bit more.
For sure.
Um, but again, the conversation we had was like, yeah, you're different. You're both different. How do we honor those differences? It doesn't matter if one of you's good at this and one of you's good at that. Like, you know what I mean? It's fine. You each have your own strengths and you each bring things to this family. And so we have to do a lot of reframing around that because I think they naturally compare themselves to each other too.
Right, of course. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's such a unique peer situation, right? This little thing is either living in your room or like right down the hall from your room, and they share your same mom, they share your same dad, and they share the same structure around what gets punished and what gets reinforced, right? Same
Yeah.
family rules that sometimes feel like they fit better than other times, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, of course, right? There are these subtle superlatives, right? I mean, our kids pick up on our values, whether we say
Mhm.
them out loud or whether it's just that we model things. And then if they are echoing them, right, they know subconsciously, if not consciously, that that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Versus if they're not, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of like I think messaging, and I think about this a lot. I cringe when people say this, and I know the best intention, but if
Mhm.
I go somewhere with Ansley, people will say, "You guys look so much alike," and it's
Mhm.
ironic because when I'm with Kenzie and just her, people will say, "Oh, she looks like you." But if I
Huh.
have them both together, they will make only that comment about one of them, and it makes me cringe each time because Kenzie has said to me, "Well, Mom, like, who do I look like?"
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, interestingly, Ansley looks like me today,
Uh-huh.
but Kenzie looks a lot more like me when I was little, except for she has blue eyes and I did not.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she looks like her dad a lot too. So, but like right now in this moment, like when we all go out together, Ansley looks like a little shrunken clone of me sometimes. Um, and people will comment on it. And again, they have good intentions, but I feel for her every time I say that, right? And that's one of those things. And then I think I respond with, yeah, she looks like me now, but she looks like me when I was a baby, to kind of try to
Right.
soften it.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that like I can't control what comes out of people's mouths,
Right.
but I see it in her face and she's made comments on it. And I'm like, ah, babe, I'm so like, but then you wonder, like, what does that do with her relationship with her sister? Does she then feel competitive just because, well, if I don't look like that, then I'm not, like, I
Mhm.
don't know what that does. So it's a lot of like I don't know, dancing around feelings, I think, and trying to make sure everyone feels heard and the reality that, like, you know, different kids require a different version of you parenting, and how do you incorporate that into your house,
Mhm.
right? Where it
Oh,
doesn't always seem fair. And our conversation is fair is not always equal. Sometimes fair is not being, one to one all the time.
right. That's
And
right.
that's a really hard pill to swallow developmentally when you're young, because fair is equal. Equal is equal. What do you mean? Um, but different needs, different, you know,
Yeah,
things.
not all kids are the same, not all families the same, not all circumstances are the same, and
Yeah.
that's one of these things where once again we've not answered any questions, but we've just talked about the problem, right? But
Well, I think it's conversing about it though. So my solution, listen, I'll report back in like 20 years and see, how this all shakes out. My solution, because I can't control a lot of this. I can't control if one of my kids looks at the other and says, "Gosh, she's so good at that. I wish I could do that." Like that's normal, right? That like feeling. But what we can do is talk about it.
mhm,
Right. And so even when I get called out for like, why am I parenting differently? Well, you're 2 years apart. So like some rules that apply to one aren't going to apply in the same way to the other. Right. But I explain why they're different.
right.
Right. To the best of my ability. And I don't know if that lands all the time, but at least I give a rationale as to the rules are different because you're different ages. And I think the example I gave the other day was, when your sister's 16, she will be able to drive. You, no matter how good of a driver you may think you are at that point in time, will legally not be able to. That is
Yeah.
just a fact. That is going to be a difference. And I use that as an example to kind of highlight just, well, different ages have different rules attached to them. But I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna stick, but I try to just explain.
Yes, I love that. Talking and watching and listening, right? Like you said, our parents never asked, "Well, how are you doing? How you feel about all this stuff?" Maybe they did, but
Yeah.
probably maybe not enough, right? I mean, I remember, having conversations with Ethan multiple times, right? And encouraging my husband, right? Because I'm a therapist, right? Like, talk to him about this. Well, I already did. We'll do it again. Let's
Keep
talk about it
talking.
again, right? Check in again, right? Because
Yeah,
life does change and developmental stages change and needs change and perspectives change,
yeah.
and paying attention to see how are these kids doing. So real quick, because I'm embarrassed to say, but for some reason, I think it was all the chatting we did before we got on, but I'm running low on battery. So what would you say? Like, what are some takeaways, right? So like, again, if our child were struggling, so as a child therapist, right, what are some of the red flags parents would watch out for to know, like, all right, my kid's not doing okay because I see fill in the blank?
Yeah. Um, well, I think first of all, it's normalizing. There's going to be an adjustment period. Like, especially when a new baby's introduced, it's not uncommon for an older kid to regress in toileting or having more tantrums or whatever. It's a lot
Mhm.
to to manage. So I don't want parents to freak out. But if that continues and doesn't seem to settle,
Mhm.
right? Obviously there's situations where there's like aggression towards the sibling that's creates a safety issue. I would obviously get that addressed, right? Um, but for the most part, I think we have to tolerate a little bit of upheaval and a little bit of chaos. And I think it's even when you're littles, like your little kids, assuming they're verbal, right? For those that have like the babies within a year, that's a different story. But even at 2 years old, your youngest can convert, their oldest can verbalize something, right? Even if it's like, I don't like baby,
Right.
you
I
know?
said, I'm mad.
Yeah. Or just like, no, I don't want to, so I think it's honoring your children's pace. Some kids are gonna have bring the sibling home and they're gonna be like, connecting and loving initially, and some are gonna be like, "What is that?" Not everyone, even little kids, aren't all baby people. You know what I mean? Like it's a reality. Um, I think it's having a lot of conversations about what to expect, and maybe even reassurance on your place is safe in this family. We're just adding to, like you're not losing anything, right? We're just adding to the family.
Like that.
Um, Because in little brain, you don't know how they rationalize this new thing coming in. They can't verbalize it. Like I often wonder, like, what did my 2-year-old daughter think when I came home with a baby? And she was actually mad at me for like 2 days
Oh,
because I'd never been away from her overnight and I wasn't there for and she cold shouldered me for like 24 hours.
oh my gosh, I bet that broke your heart.
Um, I was so tired. I was like, I don't know,
Yeah, you were too
and
busy.
but she was upset, but it's okay, right? Those are the things I think we have to sit back and say, this is a transition and it's going to be hard for some kids, harder for some than others. Um, but how do I support that they might feel threatened and how do I reassure them that they don't need to be?
Yeah.
And then kind of continuously assessing that relationship. I never made my kids share their stuff. I let them have their own space, their own toys. Like, you hear a lot of parents being like, give that to your sister, you're done with
Mm-hmm.
this toy. Any toy that got handed down was always approved by my oldest to this day. My youngest goes through the pile of like hand me downs and she's like, can I have this? And she's can say yes or no. There's some kind
Oh,
of like, but it's her stuff. We don't get
right.
to just
That
take
makes
it.
sense.
Now she just gives it to her younger sister. She's like, I don't want it, take it. That's fine. But when she was little, I didn't take something from her and give to her younger sister. That all those little things to let them know
You still
they're still
matter.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, you matter as much now as you did before.
When everything was just yours.
Right.
Yeah. We
Including
did hand
my
down
toys.
clothes and stuff and that usually worked fine because she outgrew it. She
Uh-huh.
had, she tolerated that, but like a toy or something, things she actually enjoyed, we didn't make her give any of that up.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you don't
Right.
want to build that resentment.
Right. You get my things.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Wow.
already have my parents' attention and now my stuff,
Yeah.
but I get it
Everything.
because, yeah. And I'm thinking, you're done with it. She wants it. Why not? Right. But I can also see from a kid's perspective where that doesn't feel good. And
Mhm.
again, I think that's also, having the luxury to be able to buy that thing in duplicates. And so I understand that's not a reality for everyone. But I think the bottom line is like, we're resilient. People are resilient. Kids are resilient. You know, you stumble along the way and like, there's lessons to be learned even when we're in less than ideal situations,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. So poignant.
Yeah. So don't stress too much.
Poetic. I love it. Yes. Good rap, Claudia. That was
Yeah.
amazing. You're good
All
at
right. I landed the plane. We're done.
came in for a beautiful landing. Absolutely. I love it. Just in time. My Mac did not die. Yay.
Yay. Well, that's it for today. We'll be back next week with another fun topic yet to be
Who
decided.
knows what that will be? We'll have to figure that out. But it'll probably be highly, highly exciting.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks
Bye.
for listening.